Welcome everybody, this is Steven from Genre Games. We're going to be doing something a little different. Bloodborne came out last week. I really meant to get to this last week, it was a bit closer to release date. But I decided that I'm going to do like a first impressions piece on it. Now keep in mind, it's a first impressions piece. I have not beat the game. I put, at this point, maybe 22 hours into it. Still quite a bit more to go from what I understand. Certainly New Game Plus, and there are things like the Chalice Dungeons that I haven't fully looked into yet. I've dabbled with it slightly. But I wanted to just go ahead and give you my thoughts on the game. So without further ado, I guess we'll get started. So Bloodborne was created by Hidetaka Miyazaki and From Software. And if those names sound familiar, it's probably because you recognize them from a PS3 game called Demon Souls and another game called Dark Souls. Dark Souls 2, it was also made by From Software, but after Dark Souls, development kind of split up into two groups. One went to work on Dark Souls 2, and the other came to Bloodborne. Then Miyazaki was on the Bloodborne side of things. So it should be noted that I guess Bloodborne is a PS4 exclusive, and my understanding is that they made Bloodborne with next gen in mind. And I believe Sony at the time wanted a new IP, which is why this isn't like quote-unquote Demon Souls 2. That's how Bloodborne came to being, and because Sony approached them first, they decided that they were going to make it specifically for the PS4. Now there's a lot of debate on whether this is a Souls game. The Souls games are known for being notoriously difficult, maybe not so much Dark Souls 2, but definitely Demon Souls and Dark Souls. Definitely known for their difficulty. It's something that maybe turns a lot of people off from them, and while this isn't about those games, I will say that both of those games have been incredibly fair. Just like Bloodborne is. I'll get into that later. But it's definitely accessible. Yes, there's a steep learning curve, but once you get over that, then the game, while not a piece of cake, becomes significantly easier. Case in point, it took me forever to beat Dark Souls the first time, but once I knew what I was doing, knew boss strategies, knew what areas were essential, what wasn't essential, I was able to, with ease, beat New Game Plus, and even partway through New Game Plus Plus. I actually wound up getting all the achievements in it. So it's definitely doable, but you just have to persevere and get through it the first time, or at least partway through the first time, to really get a feel for it. That being said, this game is pretty difficult to start with, but it's nothing we haven't seen before in their other games. Now, I'm not an expert on the Bloodborne story or anything. Once again, it's not in your face with the story at all. It's exactly like Dark Souls and Demon Souls in that regard. Most of the story is told through item descriptions. So it's there if you want it, there to ignore if you don't. Not that I haven't wanted it, I just been more interested in playing the game than getting through it. The other cool thing is that it kind of takes place in like a gothic Victorian setting. So my favorite outfit for my character is top hat, kind of the gentleman's cape, and even goes as well because I chose the cane to start with. So like that whole thing, it almost is like a Victorian gentleman. I picture the top hat, the monocle, the cane, so that kind of thing. But even the scenery, like the buildings, very much reminiscent of that kind of feel. And then I think the use of like werewolves, typically we think of like werewolves in London kind of thing. That seems to go pretty hand in hand to some extent. And so their inclusion in Bloodborne kind of, for me, emphasizes that Victorian feel to it. But enough talking about the background. I guess we will go ahead and dive into the graphical environment. Not a lot to talk about here. I'm choosing to focus more on the gameplay, because to me that's what's really important. Is the game fun? Looks are nice, but what's going to keep me coming back to play it again and again? It's going to be the gameplay, not the graphics. I will say that the areas I've been in feel distinctly different. From Yarnum to the Cathedral Ward to the Forbidden Woods, all of them kind of feel unique, and that's something I really appreciate. There are a bunch of small details, too, which I'll get into in a minute, but you can really tell that From Software put a lot of effort into making Bloodborne, using the PS4 to its fullest potential, and it just makes the game that much better. Bosses are, of course, bosses. They're huge. They are gross, some of them, and just have some really fine details. One thing that comes to mind for me is like the Vicar Amelia. It's like one of the earlier bosses in the game. So much so that you can almost see like individual hairs. Maybe I'm praising that a bit too much, but to me at least, you could see like the flowing hair and whatnot, and that really just stood out to me. Enemy designs are also pretty varied, which helps you distinguish, which are more deadly than the others. But what I really want to get into here is kind of the small details. There are a number of small details that, to me, really enhance the experience beyond anything I would have expected. So first and foremost, you're going to travel a lot. You're going to go through streets and through forests and buildings and all sorts of places. And there are going to be enemies. There's going to be all kinds of enemies. And you're going to have to fight those enemies. Well, the more you fight, the more blood is going to splatter. It's going to get on, the pathway and the walls. But it even gets on your clothes. And as you progress, you can notice your clothes getting bloodier and bloodier. And I kind of like to think of it as a reminder of all the hardships and battles that I've already been through. Kind of as a reminder that there's still more to come. And in addition to your clothes being bloody and getting worse as you progress, your face actually gets dirtier as well. That's kind of just really cool. That's something you may or may not notice. Because a lot of Bloodborne, you're going to be looking at your character from behind as you progress. But if you just take the time to just notice the clothes, just look at your face occasionally, it's a really cool effect that just adds, as they say, the cherry on top of the cake. But you don't have to stay dirty forever. In fact, every time you go to the Hunter's Dream, it's going to clean your face and clothes for you. So, I kind of, back to my memories of previous battles thing, I like to think of this as, it's making room for the new memories and the new blood and stories and everything that you've yet to experience. Another really cool detail is the character creator. And it's probably one of the more advanced ones I've seen in an action RPG, but take that with a grain of salt because I don't tend to play this kind of thing. Though Bloodborne and Dark Souls and Demon Souls are very distinct exceptions. But so I didn't mess around with it too much because even when I do play this kind of game, or even like Saints Row, I have a go-to character model. I'm under the impression, it's my philosophy, that if you're going to be playing a game for upwards of 40, 50 plus hours, you might as well like what you see on the screen. And so I designed my character with that in mind. Someone I'm going to like looking at, because it's going to define me for the duration of my playthrough. So, but there are a couple of cool things about the character creator that I would just want to point out real quick. One, even down to the smallest detail, you can customize a lot. Case in point, your eye color. A lot of games will just say like, oh, what's your eye color? And it'll make both eyes the same color by default. Well, in Bloodborne, you can actually change them independently of each other. So you can make one eye blue and one green, one red and one white, etc. You're not limited to having both of them the same color. And as I mentioned, you're going to be looking at your character from behind most of the game, but just to have that as a feature is kind of cool. It's something we don't typically see in a lot of character creators. Another thing I really enjoyed, me in particular, is that you can save your design as a favorite, as a preset, and load it in to a new character should you decide to make a new character. Of course, there's New Game Plus and stuff, so you can just keep your character and port them over. But if you wanted to pick a different origin or pick a different starting weapon, build your character differently, you can do that without having to create a whole new character. If you like the look of your character, you can just save it, and when you go to make a new one, just load that in, so you don't have to waste time getting everything just perfect. So once again, that kind of caters to me, who has like the same character design I typically use for these kind of things. And it's not anything you have to use by any means, but it's just cool that they added that. Now onto the gameplay side of things. Just like its predecessors, Bloodborne is absolutely brutal. Enemies can hide around corners or even in the shadows, and they will strike before you see them. There are many different enemy types and varieties, from rats and dogs to hulking beasts with giant axes or a ball and chain. And then there are the bosses, and that's a whole different story. But needless to say, they don't take shit from anyone. Bloodborne is a difficult game, but for the most part, it's pretty fair. If you take damage or you die, chances are it's your fault. It's a good punishment system. And with any good punishment system, you learn from it. The more you die or you get damaged, you learn what mistakes you're making. You will learn subconsciously the location of enemy hiding spots. You will learn boss strategies, shortcuts through different areas, and all of this comes naturally through gameplay, and it'll make your subsequent trips through that area even easier. I did notice with one of the enemies, I guess it's the Leech Warlock, or whatever they're called, there wasn't really, that's probably the only thing I wouldn't consider fair. Often he would hit you with magic and come up and suck the inside out of you, and then as you recover from that attack, he'd stun you again, and you can't move, and so he'd come and suck the health and stuff out of you as well. So really, if you get caught in that, I haven't found a way to get out of that alive yet. So not really the most fair, but that's just one event out of a whole vast world. A few things set Bloodborne apart from previous games from software, though, like the Souls games. Bloodborne, at its core, was designed to be faster and more offensive. To accomplish this, From Software removed basically all the shields from the game. There is one, it's the wooden plank or the wooden shield, but that's not going to really cut it. Unlike other Souls games as well, you don't have armor. You just have general outfits. And that does kind of alter your stats slightly, but not to a huge extent in my experience. However, to make up for this, and to further emphasize the offensive nature, Bloodborne introduces what's known as the regain system. So you're fighting in battle, and you get hit. Well, that health isn't gone forever. You have a short window of time in which you can counterattack, and doing so will slowly refill portions of the health in which you lost. Now, there is a short window for this, so chances are you're not going to be able to recover all of it. But recovering some is better than recovering none, and you don't have to waste your health items as quickly. But because of this healing factor, it really emphasizes and pushes you to jump back into combat quickly after you take damage. Also, our weapons. Souls games are known for having a large variety of weapons, and it's not something that Bloodborne has done as well. You can buy weapons through the store with your blood echoes, provided you've reached certain points in the game. Certain weapons won't unlock until you beat a certain boss or get a certain emblem or something. And it really wasn't until the first boss fight for me that this option became available. And even then you only had one or two. And it's since expanded a little, but not much. A lot of people might be concerned with upgrading your starting weapon, but due to this lack of availability of weapons, it's going to last you a while, so you might as well upgrade it. It'll make things easier. By the time you find something else to replace it, it's going to be well worth it to just go ahead and upgrade. But in line with the weapons, though, there aren't as many, but each weapon serves a dual purpose. These are called trick weapons in-game. And so, essentially, it allows each weapon to function as two distinctly different ones. You can switch between them at any time with one of the bumper buttons. And so, the starting weapons are good examples. I started with the threaded cane, for instance. It's a cane. It's good, kind of acts as a sword almost. It's good for short-range melee, using slashing and thrusting attacks, much like a sword. However, by hitting, I think it's L1, you can change it into a whip. So the whip is obviously better for hitting multiple enemies at the same time, and it has a longer reach, which I generally stick with the whip, but there are instances, especially when they get in close, that the cane is better. Like I said, whether you're in combat or not, you can switch between these forms. And what's really interesting is that if you time it right, if I swing the cane, I can follow through immediately with an attack with the whip, and it'll already be in whip form. So you can change on the fly even in the middle of combat without breaking your combo. One other big difference as far as weapons go are firearms. Also kind of replacing the shield to an extent. Firearms can be really useful for stunning enemies. Initially, you can choose from a pistol or a blunderbuss, which is more like a shotgun. And like the other weapons, you can acquire more through game progression. Now, they take quicksilver bullets, which are pretty plentiful throughout the world of Yharnam, but if you really need some, you can actually sacrifice a bit of your health to gain 5 temporary bullets. But of course, you may be wondering, well, how do you parry and riposte without a shield? Well, you can't parry, but you can use the firearms to riposte. And in Bloodborne, it's called a visceral attack. Essentially, if you shoot an enemy at the correct time as they're starting an attack, then they'll get stunned and drop to their knees. And you can run up to them and do a light attack, and it'll do what's known as a visceral attack. As kind of like the riposte in Dark Souls and Demon Souls. And so it'll just do major damage to them. And it actually works on bosses too. So if you can time it right, a good way to get a large chunk of the boss's health done really quickly. One of the big components with Dark Souls and Bloodborne and stuff of that nature is that they're kind of meant to be played single player. But, of course, the option to play multiplayer is present both in PvP and co-op. Now, I haven't done anything with PvP. I haven't, invaded anyone. No one's invaded me. Nothing. However, co-op is a different story. In previous games, in order to summon someone, you had to activate their summon sign. In order to be summoned, you had to get an item and throw your summon sign on the ground and kind of stay within that general area. That sign would show up in other people's worlds, and they could interact with it. And assuming everything goes through, you would be summoned as a phantom into their world for that particular area. It's also noted that, like other games, co-op lasts for a short amount of time. Essentially, once you beat a boss, for instance, the other person will disappear. But in this, you have bells. So first you have insight, which you get by doing things generally with bosses. So discovering a boss and killing a boss, notably. And there are items that you can ingest that will give you insight as well. But you get items. One is the beckoning bell, and one is the small resonant bell. And so in order to summon someone, you spend spend an insight and ring the beckoning bell. And it searches for someone who has rung the small resonant bell. So it's kind of similar. However, the key thing with Bloodborne is you can set up a network password called a watchword. It's an 8-letter phrase or word that you can give to your friends. And so when you're looking for co-op, it will prioritize people with the same password. So, for instance, with like Dark Souls, a friend and I were trying to play, and it would take us like 15 to 20 minutes every time to find each other. Due to network issues, well, not so much network issues, but, trying to just find each other. And often by the time the sign popped up, the other person had removed it and replaced it down, which prevents the first sign from working. So, like I said, it took like upwards of 20 minutes, easily, every time we wanted to summon each other. However, with Bloodborne and this password, we have been able to connect to each other within 2 or 3 minutes. And it's been great, because that's 3 minutes compared to 20 minutes. That's 17 minutes that you can be playing the game and enjoying it. So it's not a true invite system, but it certainly helps find your friends quicker. Now, with summoning someone from co-op, like I said, I haven't had any experience with this. You can, or when you ring the co-op bell, it will sometimes pull an NPC into your world who will encourage people to come in and invade you. And you can do that through a different bell. I don't know the name of it off the top of my head. But as long as that NPC is there, people can invade your world. You can stop this by going to killer, whatever. And then finally, another major part of Bloodborne is the Chalice dungeons. Now, these are procedurally generated dungeons, so every time you go into one, it's going to be different. And I should rephrase that. It's not every time you go into one, it's every time you create one. So what happens is after the third boss, it's the Bloodstarved Beast, you get the Thumaru Chalice. And so if you have 1,000 souls or blood echoes and the required ritual materials, you can use that chalice to create a chalice dungeon. And so each one has a depth level, which is a difficulty. So this one's a depth of 1, meaning easy. And each one has 3 layers. So these consist of, you go in and you find a door and it's locked. And so you have to go search that layer for the mechanism which unlocks the door. You fight through enemies, traps, etc. Till you find that, you pull it, and the door unlocks. You go through it, and you will face a boss. You beat the boss, you have access to an elevator that will take you to layer 2. If you're on layer 2, you do the same thing, it will take you to level 3. And so, the first time, well, I don't want to say the first time, but the type of chalice you use changes the dungeon. So at first, the only one you can do is the Thumaru Chalice. In the process of beating that first dungeon, you will gain the Thumaru Root Chalice and Central Thumaru Chalice, I believe, which you can use for further chalice dungeons. The randomness and the procedurally generated element comes in with the root chalices. So, as you notice, there are 2 types. There are the regular chalices and the chalices with the word root in their name. And so if you make a dungeon with the Thumaru Chalice, beat it, and then you go make another dungeon with the Thumaru Chalice, it's going to be the same one. The randomness is only present in the root chalices. So if you make a dungeon with the Thumaru Root Chalice, it's going to be different than the next dungeon you make with the Thumaru Root Chalice. And there's, 3 or 4, at least, different types of regular chalices. And there's a certain order to go through, because you can also search for other people's dungeons. You can share it with your friends. And of course, you can always do co-op and stuff within the dungeons themselves. Or you can invade and try and kill people. In order to access that, though, you have to get the Short Root Chalice, I believe it's called. And it's in one of the set dungeons. And there's a certain order. But you really only have to go through 4 regular chalice dungeons before you get that ability. But it's pretty cool. A lot of times you'll just be wandering around and step on a trap, and then enemies will spawn or you'll die or whatever. But the first one, for me at least, wasn't hard, and it was a lot of fun. I can't wait to really delve into it a bit more. But all in all, I think Bloodborne is a very strong contender for Game of the Year. I know it's early, it's, April 2nd as of this recording, but I truly believe that Bloodborne could take Game of the Year. It's a brilliant setting, has punishing combat, and has some unique mechanics to it with the trick weapons and the chalice dungeons and stuff. And they almost flawlessly come together to create what I can only describe as a modern gaming masterpiece. Now, I say almost flawlessly, because as of now, the only issue I have with the game really is that the loading times are fairly lengthy. And it's not even so much that they're lengthy, but you will be seeing loading screens a lot. Every time you warp to a new area, every time you die and have to respawn, you will see a loading screen. And I haven't actually timed it, but I'd estimate somewhere at least 20 seconds, 15, 20 seconds, if not more. I've heard reports of up to 30 or 40 seconds for each loading screen. And that in itself isn't a problem, but with the frequency at which you will be seeing them, it adds up. Now, I do know that, or it's been reported that they are working on a patch for it. So hopefully it'll get taken care of soon. And it's not like game breaking or anything. It's just a minor annoyance. But it's going to happen. But taking all that into consideration, Bloodborne has been doing phenomenally well review-wise as well. Once again, as of this recording, Bloodborne is sitting at a 92 on Metacritic. And I don't know how much faith you want to put into that. Obviously not counting score, outlets that don't give scores and whatnot. But this 92 is based off of 72 critic reviews, all of which are positive. And last I checked, 10 of those 72 are perfect hundreds. So Hidetaka Miyazaki and the rest of From Software has done an exceptional job creating Bloodborne, creating what I guess could be considered the true sequel to Dark Souls. And it's just as much fun, if not more so, than the other games that they've made. And yeah, I'm definitely glad I got it. And if the other Souls games, Dark Souls, Demon Souls, and the like, if those appeal to you, Bloodborne is right up your alley. Just, if it's not really your thing, then it's certainly not a bad idea to pass it up, because it's going to be tough, but if you can stick through it, and if it's your kind of thing, then you will have a great time with it. So that'll conclude my first impressions piece for Bloodborne, and check back here at Jonvin Games for Let's Play content, and hopefully I'll try and get some more stuff like this out at some point. So if you liked this, let me know how I did in the comments below, like, subscribe, and we'll see you on the flip side. Later.